What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On this episode, I'm going to be giving you guys my college football Week 12 reactions. We're going to be discussing Washington and Oregon State, Michigan struggling against Maryland. We're going to hit on a couple of more games as well. Also got some thoughts on Jordan Travis injury. How does it impact FSU for the remainder of this season and their ability to win the national championship? If you haven't already, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoy this episode, give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify and share the podcast with your friends, family members, and acquaintances if you enjoy and you want to help support the pod. I'm going to need people to stop sleeping on Washington. You know, I was really surprised when Washington was a 2.5-point favorite coming into this game against Oregon State. And a lot of people that I talked to were telling me that, oh yeah, Oregon State upsetting Washington, lock of the week. And I get that Washington, the way they beat Oregon and the way Oregon has played since then makes you believe that Oregon is a better team than Washington. But at the same time, we still have to give Washington credit for that win. And we still have to give this team credit for remaining undefeated. Look, at this time of the season, style points don't really matter all that much. All that really matters is finding ways to remain undefeated. And that's what Washington has found ways to do. And I never felt like Oregon State had a shot at winning this game simply for the fact that I never thought that they will be able to get enough out of their passing attack to be able to pull off this upset. You see, Damian Martinez was pretty much the majority of Oregon State's offense in this game. And you're not going to be able to beat a team like Washington that has one of the top quarterbacks in college football in Michael Penix with DJ Uiagalelei giving you subpar play at quarterback. This dude is so overrated. He's not trash, but he's not good neither. He was overthrowing wide open wide receivers. Yeah, he made a couple of throws, 12, 15 yards downfield with pressure in his face, and he had some really big time runs. Hell, he was better running the ball in this game than he was throwing the football. Now, albeit, Michael Penix, he didn't start the game out hot. He started out pretty slow, which has kind of been a theme for Washington's offense. In a couple of games that I've watched them play this season, they've had the tendency to get out to some slow starts. But Washington, once they went up 22-10 at halftime, I kind of felt like the game was over. But Oregon State, to their credit, they played really well in the second half. Their defense shut down Washington's offense until the closing minutes of the fourth quarter when Washington really needed a play or two on offense to seal this game. Oregon State, like I said earlier, Damian Martinez was the majority of their offense. You look at their receivers, they're really small, and they really struggle to push the ball downfield in the vertical passing game. The majority of Oregon State's offense comes from short plays with receivers making yards after the catch or them getting a couple of good throws in the middle area of the field in the intermediate short passing game. But outside of that, this offense, when it comes to their passing attack, is not really that great. They don't really have talented receivers, and they don't really have great quarterback play. Hell, I felt like Aiden Childs should have stayed in this game for a lot longer. I would have loved to see what he could have done in this game, but this was a really impressive win from Washington, and it was a statement win because at this point, next week they play Washington State in the Apple Cup. There's no reason why they should have won that game and go into the Pac-12 championship game undefeated, which is something that many people didn't envision Washington being able to do even when they were able to beat Oregon. And always was, man, when are they going to end up losing because they're not going to be undefeated? I like how people thought the Pac-12 title game was going to be a matchup between two one-loss teams and winner gets into the college football playoffs. Now, that still can happen. But at the end of the day, Washington is the most complete team in the Pac-12 right now. Their defense showed you in this game that they actually has what it takes to stop a serviceable offense. Albeit DJ Uiagalelei, he's not really that good, but I don't think too many people would have expected for Washington's defense to pretty much have their best performance of the whole entire season. We haven't seen Washington's defense play this way since the start of this year. They were able to get some big turnovers when it mattered the most. Of course, they couldn't stop the run game. That's Oregon State's memo. That's what they like to do. They like to impose their will on you up front, but it's not like Oregon State was running the football at will and Washington couldn't do anything to stop it. This was one of Washington's best defensive performances in this game. They showed that they can be a complete team. They don't just have to win games with their offense. Now, when they go up against Oregon, eventually in a couple of weeks, we're just going to see just how good this defense can be against one of the top offenses in the nation in a rematch against Bo Nix. But even against USC, their defense was able to come away with a couple of big stops. You don't need a great defense to be able to win it all. You need a top 50 or better defense to have a shot at winning a title, and that's what Washington has. They got a solid group of pass rushers. Their secondary is not all that great, but up front, I think Washington is good enough to handle themselves with amongst the best teams in college football. Meanwhile, you look at Oregon State, they still have a ways to go until they're ready to be a true playoff contender. There's a reason why they had that dark horse playoff label coming into this season. The receivers aren't bad, but one of their wide receivers, I was watching it with a homegirl of mine, and she was like, damn, like, why do they have small receivers? And the reason being is that Oregon State isn't a team that recruits at a high level consistently every single year. With the way their offense is structured, you don't really need great receivers. You just need receivers that are good enough to make things happen after the catch, and they're primarily a run-first team. And, you know, late in this game when they needed big plays downfield out of their passing game, they weren't able to get that. The receivers weren't able to get a lot of separation downfield, and DJ Uiagalelei wasn't able to hit guys when they were open downfield. I'm really shocked that the majority of people that bet on these games picked Oregon State to win this game outright. I never felt like Oregon State had a shot at beating Washington, even when this game got close. Because eventually, despite how well you can run the football, today's style of football is a passing league. That's just not true for the NFL. It's also true for college football. In late game situations, you have to be able to get some efficient play out of your passing game, and Oregon State wasn't able to get that. Now, that last throw by DJ Uiagalelei wasn't really his fault because the tight end stopped running, but that just shows you that that wasn't Oregon State's strength. Oregon State's strength is running the football, being a physical team at the point of attack, which they were to a degree in this game, but you need more than just a good run game to beat a team like Washington. You need good quarterback play. The only team that really was a threat to beat Washington this year was Oregon, because they had Bo Nix. And the reason why Washington won that game was because their defense was able to get big stops in fourth down situations. People make it seem like Oregon lost that game because of not Mario Cristobal, but Dan Lanning's aggressive decision-making in those fourth down spots. But you got to give Washington credit for being able to come away with stops in those situations. Because Oregon could have easily came away with those fourth down conversions, and if they would have hit on those, that would have been a completely different game that Washington probably would have lost. But I'm not super convinced that Washington just would lose to Oregon in a rematch. People are kind of overrating Oregon and underrating Washington. For some reason, people are putting Oregon over Washington in terms of who's a better team, and Washington beat these boys head-to-head. And I'm not super convinced that Washington is going to suffer their first loss to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. I think that a lot of people need to stop disrespecting this team and look at this team for what they are. They're undefeated. Not too many other undefeated teams left in college football, and the Pac-12 has been a gauntlet of a conference. Hell, most of us probably thought that Washington would have lost because the Pac-12 has been so damn good and so damn deep this year that you thought this conference would have cannibalized on itself, similar to the Big 12 last season. But Washington demonstrated how they are an elite team in college football this year. You want to know how Washington is an elite team? Because elite teams are able to win games on the road. You see, normally, when you have a team like Washington that has the talent advantage and they're going on the road against a team that's not so talented, you feel like there's a good chance for an upset to happen because the majority of upsets in college football over the last couple of years have taken place when you had a team that was a road favorite that had a talent advantage going good on the road against a team that they may not have been as talented, but they were a pretty solid team. And plus, when you throw in the home field advantage, that kind of tilts the momentum in the home team's favor. But the difference between Washington is that they weren't a favorite coming into this game. They were an underdog, which was really disrespectful by Vegas. Because Washington has demonstrated prior to this game that they are an elite team. Yeah, they barely beat Arizona State, one of the worst teams in Power 5, but when you're a good team, you find ways to win close games, no matter who they're against and where they are. And you also have the ability to just find ways to win. Not always leaning on one side of the football to carry you all the time. Washington's defense was the MVP of this game. Everybody on that Washington defense deserves player of the game recognition. Because when this offense went cold in the second half, the defense stepped up and they handled business. And you probably wouldn't have even envisioned Washington being able to win a game like this with this style of play against one of the more physical teams in this conference. Washington remains undefeated on the season. They're 11-0 going into the Apple Cup against Washington State, which they most likely should win, and they should be 12-0 in their rematch against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. Let me know your thoughts on this game down in the comment section down below. Were you overlooking Washington in this game? Did you think this game was going to be an upset? I want to hear your comments in the comment section below. Man, are you tired of looking at your stale, boring-ass room? You want to know a way you can spice your room up and turn that thing into an out-of-this-galaxy experience? Click the link in the description or pinned comment and grab you a Starry projector light. The Starry projector light comes with 10 changeable color options, a built-in Bluetooth speaker, 12 and 15 switchable constellations, planets, moons, and stars. Transform your room from a depressing wasteland into a vibrant starry wonderland. The Starry projector light makes for a great holiday gift for family, friends, and loved ones. Click the link in the description or pinned comment and get one today and transform your room into a breathtaking, starry wonderland. Jordan Travis suffered a really devastating injury in FSU's win over North Alabama, and it looked pretty serious. He had a run early in the first quarter where his leg got bent awkwardly. They had to cart him off the field. And the whole entire stadium of Doak Campbell just lost their breath. It was completely quiet. And then you have Tate Rodemaker who comes in, and he had a pretty good performance. 13 of 23, 217 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. When it comes to FSU being able to win out, you should be able to get the job done with Rodemaker at quarterback. You got a really good team around them. Great receivers. Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson. You got Jaheim Bell at tight end. And you got a really good offensive line. And your defense is pretty good also. But I don't know if you're going to be able to win a national championship without Jordan Travis. You see, if Tate Rodemaker is going to be able to lead FSU to a national title this year, he needs to pull a Cardale Jones. I don't know how many of you guys remember Cardale Jones, but he came in years ago and led Ohio State to a national championship when their starting quarterback that season, JT Barrett, went down with an injury. In his last 3 games, he was impressive in the Big Ten championship. He was impressive in the semifinals, and he also had a good performance in the championship game, which helped the Buckeyes win it all that season. You're going to need that kind of quarterback play out of Rodemaker if you're going to be able to make that happen. FSU has one of the most talented teams in college football. They don't really have too many weaknesses, But one thing that I will say about this team is that they're really inconsistent in terms of being able to play their best football consistently every single week. Yes, they are able to find ways to win games, but are they going to be able to survive Louisville going against Jeff Brom, whose nickname is the Upset Master? There's a reason why they call Jeff Brom the Upset Master. I'm confident that Florida State can win that game, and I'm really confident that they should be able to beat Florida. Florida doesn't have a damn defense. Their offense is good enough to put up a couple of points, but I don't think their defense is going to be able to give Rodemaker some problems. And this is somebody who isn't a freshman or a sophomore. He's been part of this program for a while. He was one of Coach Norvell's first recruits when he first took the FSU job. So he has a good amount of experience. He understands the offense. So yeah, losing Jordan Travis is a huge loss because it looks like his career with FSU is pretty much done unless a miracle happens. But I think that Rodemaker can at least get them to a point where they can beat Florida. They can beat Louisville in the ACC championship. That game probably is going to be close. It's going to be really uncomfortable to watch if you're a Florida State fan, but you should be able to pull that win out. One thing about FSU that I do give them credit for is that they may not play their best football consistently every single week, but they find ways to win close games, and that's the sign of a great team. Great teams have something that I call the escape door ability. That means that anytime they get put in a situation when their back is against the wall and it looks like they're about to lose, they just find a way to win. And this is a pretty balanced team all around. They're really good throwing the football. You got a really good rushing attack. Your defense is pretty good when everybody's playing at a high level. And this is the kind of event that can kind of rally a team. Jordan Travis' injury is really significant. He meant a lot to this program, a lot to Coach Norvell, and he means a lot to Florida State University. And the team can come together more behind this, rally behind it, and use it as, motivation to continue their undefeated season. Because this is a really big season that Florida State has had this year. And even when I expected them to go undefeated coming into this season, I was a little bit skeptical about it. And I still am a little bit skeptical about it because it seems like a situation that may be a little bit too good to be true. But they still are undefeated. All they got to do is beat a Florida team that has no defense. And you got to be able to beat a really well-coached Louisville team. You should be able to get the job done. Now, when you get into the college football playoffs and you got to win with Rodemaker, if you got to play against Georgia or Alabama or Michigan in the first round, I don't know. You probably have a better shot at beating Michigan or Ohio State with Rodemaker than you do of being able to beat a team like Georgia or Alabama in the first round that's really good on all phases of the game. Michigan, their offense isn't that great. All they do is really run the football. Same thing with Ohio State, although both of those teams have great defenses. When you're going up against a team that has a skeptical offense, you always got a chance with the kind of playmakers that FSU has offensively, and they're more talented on the offensive side of the football than what Michigan and Ohio State are, in my opinion. So when it comes to FSU being able to win a national championship with Rodemaker, it really just depends on who you get matched up against in the first round, because there's an old motto that goes, styles make fights. FSU, they got a really talented team around Rodemaker. It's not like Jordan Travis was carrying this team on his back, although he was playing at a really high level. Florida State does a really good job at playing complementary football, and they also got a really good coaching staff. Their offensive coordinator should be in the running for a couple of head coaching jobs, and same can probably be said about their defensive coordinator as well. When you got a really good coaching staff, especially in today's age of college football, yeah, losing your star quarterback is going to be a big loss, but you should be able to get competent quarterback play out of Rodemaker. This was somebody that was pretty highly touted coming out of high school. Mike Norvell brought him along with them to FSU, and now it's his chance to step up, and he most likely was going to be the guy to replace Jordan Travis next season anyway, because their other quarterback who they got, who a lot of people were really high on when he was coming out of high school, A.J. Duffy, he's not really ready to play yet. Rodemaker can come in and get the job done with the talent that you have around him as long as FSU is able to play their best football down the stretch. Now you can't afford to have any days where you kind of start off slow and you start to slack off. Like, you got to be able to come in and dominate Florida, and you got to be able to beat Louisville pretty handily. Because if you go into that Florida game, which is a rivalry game, and you go into the ACC championship game and you play the same way that you did against Boston College or even Miami, you're not going to win those games. FSU is way more talented than that. Okay, this is one of the most talented teams in college football this season. Regardless of what the recruiting rankings may say, this is a team that mostly is built through the transfer portal. Their best players, they got from the transfer portal. Even Jordan Travis, he came from the transfer portal initially. So I think that Rodemaker is good enough to get this team to the ACC championship unscathed against Florida, and they should be able to win this conference championship, although they are going up against the upset master, and that really concerns me. If you're going up against anybody else, Clemson, North Carolina, or whoever, I would be more confident than what I am with you going against a coach like Jeff Brom that makes his living off pulling off massive upsets. And my last thing is, how is the committee going to view this injury? Because one of the people on the committee did say that they do take injuries into account. If FSU wins out, is Jordan Travis' injury going to be a reason why they could potentially get bumped over for a team like Texas or a one-loss Oregon team potentially? And then Washington, they're still undefeated too. They got a really big win on the road in Corvallis against Oregon State. So I want to know how this injury is going to affect how the committee views Florida State when they end up releasing their final rankings, if they are able to win out like how I expect. But this injury to Jordan Travis, really unfortunate, really sad. This was somebody who pretty much bleed the garnet and gold. This was somebody who, although he didn't start his career out with FSU, he's a Seminole through and through. He bleeds it in his blood. And I watched Jordan Travis' career at Florida State over the last couple of years. I remember one point when anytime he came into the game, the only thing he was going to do was run the football. But he has improved tremendously over the last couple of years, and I'm hoping that he can rehab to 100% after this injury, and hopefully we can see him playing in the NFL on Sundays. But this is a really unfortunate injury that comes at a really bad time for FSU when the season pretty much is over. But they should be able to at least win against Florida and beat Louisville in the ACC championship. As far as winning the national championship, I think your hopes are pretty much all but over. Okay, I'm not counting you out, but if you're telling me you're going to be able to beat, a team like Alabama or Georgia, if you have to play them with the 1 seed, I don't know about that. Even Michigan and Ohio State, with how good their defenses are, is Rodemaker going to be able to step up and have success against two of college football's premier defenses? I don't really know. Clemson got a big win against North Carolina, 31-20. Carolina left a lot of points off the board in this game. Okay, their running back, Omarion Hampton, this dude is insanely talented. He had 178 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. He was averaging 9.4 yards per carry. This dude is a freaking bulldozer. It's like he was playing Madden 25 up there, running guys over, trucking guys. But he left 2 touchdowns on the field. He had a fumble early on when Drake Maye got a really big 4th and 6 conversion attempt to Taz Walker. It was really crazy. Like, Carolina went for it on 4th and 6, and everybody was looking at Mac Brown like, what the hell are you doing? And then Drake Maye throws a beautiful dot right along the sideline to Taz Walker, which gets them in the red zone. And then Omarion Hampton, he fumbles the ball inside the 10, gives it back to Clemson. And then he has another fumble later on in the game when he's about to score a touchdown, and then the Clemson defender comes behind them and knocks the football out. If UNC would have been able to capitalize on those 2 possessions and they would have resulted in touchdowns, this game probably would have tilted in their favor. Drake Maye, he had a really good performance I thought Clemson, for the most part, did a really good job at being able to contain him, because you're never going to be able to shut down a guy as talented as Drake Maye. There was one play when he threw a 33-yard touchdown when he basically was avoiding pressure and he basically threw a fadeaway. And I was like, bro, what the hell is this dude doing? But it didn't matter because he still had enough arm strength to get the ball there. Most quarterbacks, when they're fading back and they throw a kind of pass like that, it most of the times results in either an incompletion or an interception. But that's not the case with Drake Maye. This dude is like a freaking superhuman. And not only was he carving up this Clemson secondary through the air with all these crazy ass passes, but he was also a force on the ground. Anytime UNC needed a big play on the ground to keep the drive alive, Drake Maye was there. Omarion Hampton had a big night on the ground, but so did Drake Maye. He had some really big runs. This dude is a really good athlete. And I'm now starting to understand the reasoning more and more why people are making an argument for Drake Maye being quarterback one in next year's draft over Caleb Williams, because nearly anything that Caleb Williams can do, Drake Maye can do just as the same or better. That fadeaway touchdown that he threw was insane, and that 4th and 6 dime to Taz Walker was even crazier. But the fact that Omarion Hampton left 2 touchdowns on the field, it really hurt them in this game. And although their defense started out the game playing well, eventually you knew it was going to come a point when Clemson's offense was going to start rolling. And they didn't really get going until their final possession before halftime, when they scored a touchdown. Clay Klubnik was able to punch it in. And then in the second half, Clemson's offense really got rolling. Will Shipley, Phil Maffa, both had really good second half performances, especially Will Shipley. Okay, he's one of the more underrated running backs in college football. And it's crazy because he had a lot of hype coming out of high school. But I guess the fact that Clemson hasn't really been in the national title conversation kind of has taken the spotlight off of a guy like Will Shipley, because he had 126 rushing yards. He had a couple of really big explosive runs in the second half. And he also had a big catch as well that went for 36 yards. So he's a really good all-around, all-purpose back. I'm really interested in seeing where he's going to get drafted at if he's able to come out for the 2024 NFL draft. He has a pretty interesting skill set. Not really a big physical runner, but he is pretty tough inside of the tackles. Although he's not going to be somebody that's going to run through you. He's somebody that's either going to run past you or he's going to break your ankles. He had a couple of ankle breakers in the second half of this game as well. And to their credit, although Drake Maye was doing a lot of crazy shit, their pass rush got a lot of pressure on him in big moments of this game, especially in the fourth quarter. This pass rush was humming all game long, and it was a large reason why UNC's offense wasn't able to have too much success against this defense outside of the first quarter. The first quarter was probably UNC's best offensive showing throughout this game. And like I said, Omarion Hampton, if he doesn't have those 2 fumbles and those drives, turn into touchdowns or whatnot, UNC probably is on the winning end of this thing. But Clemson got the win. I felt like Clemson was a lock to win this game because they play their best football at home. And this probably can be considered a little bit of a disappointing season for Clemson when you think about the expectations that they had coming into this year. I don't think that many people in the national media expected them to be a playoff contender, but you expected them to at least be in a conversation to make it to the ACC championship game. So they're en route to win 9 games this season, which is pretty respectable. It's just that when you think about what they've done in the past, the expectations have kind of went down a little bit. It's like now you look at Clemson as a team that probably is going to be contending to be in the New Year's Six bowl game. They're going to be around 10 wins, but you kind of question if they're ever going to get back to that national championship level. And I'm wondering if Dabo Swinney is going to change his approach to the transfer portal this offseason, although this game probably isn't going to be anything that may motivate him to do that. Because, you were able to beat a really good North Carolina team, but you still look back at that loss to Florida State. You could have won that game. And you were playing that game at home. But outside of that game, Clemson, when they're playing in Death Valley, they're a really tough team to beat, and that still shows me that they're still a really good program. When you're able to defend home turf, and it's really hard to come away with wins against you when they have to travel on the road to beat you, that's still a sign that you're a pretty good program. I just don't know if Clemson is that elite program because the quarterback play out of Cade Klubnik for the majority of this season hasn't been great. He's played some really good football the last couple of weeks. In this game, he was pretty efficient, didn't have any turnovers. He made some really big throws downfield, and also he had some really big runs as well. He kind of is like a discount value version of Trevor Lawrence in a sense. He kind of has a similar skill set in terms of how he runs. He runs kind of tall and lanky, and then the way he throws the football is a little bit similar to Trevor Lawrence, but he's just not as good as a quarterback as what Trevor Lawrence was. He's like a great value brand version of him and with shorter hair, but I'm eager to see the growth that he has going into his second season and Garrett Riley's offense next year in 2024. For North Carolina, this season started out with a lot of promise. You started out smacking South Carolina, and then you got to the point where you were undefeated, and then you lost to Virginia, one of the worst teams in the ACC, and then you had another head-scratching loss right after that, and then you had a close game against Duke. This team, for some reason, they start out hot, but they kind of fizzle out during the second stretch of the season, and their defense played well for the first couple of games, and after that, I don't know what the hell has been going wrong with this defense. Now, you can't blame this defense entirely for the loss with the offense, leaving touchdowns on the field, but this defense in the second half, they had no answers for this Clemson offense. This Clemson offense was humming on all cylinders, and they did get a couple of stops here and there, but not any big ones when it mattered the most. They couldn't get any big turnovers that could alter the momentum of this game. They couldn't really help their offense out, putting them in more favorable field position. This was a good performance by Clemson, although they started out slow. Hell, the way the game started, you would have thought that North Carolina was going to blow these fools out. But the fact that they had those costly fumbles by Omarion Hampton, that really hurt them. You come away with touchdowns on those turnovers, you probably end up winning this game if you're a UNC, because that would have been a 14-point swing, and you would have probably won this game 34-31 instead of losing it 31-20. But congratulations to Clemson on the big win. Give your thoughts on this game and what your initial thoughts were watching this matchup down in the comment section down below. UCLA beat USC, and Chip Kelly just might have saved his job with this win, because coming up the week leading up to this game, there were reports that came out that said that UCLA was going to part ways with Chip Kelly after this game concluded, and the athletic director came out and denied those reports. He said that they were really disrespectful, unprofessional, but I don't really know. Okay, because, Chip Kelly, he does have a not-so-great record at UCLA, but that's mostly stemming from him struggling out the gate his first couple of years at UCLA. But the last 3 seasons, he's been really good. They're on pace to win 8 games this year if they're able to win their bowl game. And I didn't even expect UCLA to be a 7-8 win team this year. I kind of thought they would be a 6-win team. I thought they were kind of in rebuild mode, losing DTR and Zach Charbonnet to the NFL last year. And you bring in Dante Moore. He was great the first couple of games, and then after that, he looked awful. So you got to make some quarterback changes. And this was a pretty good season for UCLA and a really great win. UCLA, they made USC look soft in this game. USC, to their credit, their defense played a pretty good game. This probably is the best performance that the Trojans have gotten out of their defense all season long, but their offense just went flat in this game. Caleb Williams, he had a solid game, but it hasn't been on the level of the other games that we've seen him have in the past. It definitely isn't anything close to the game that he had against Washington. And then you had 2 costly fumbles by Zachariah Branch and Marshawn Lloyd. So when 2 of your best players are giving up the football, that's just a sign that it's just not a great day for you offensively. UCLA, defensively, they were getting after Caleb Williams, harassing him all game long. And not just were they the more physical team on the defense side of the football, but on the offense side as well, they had some really big physical runs in this game. TJ Harden was averaging 6.5 yards per carry. He was running guys over, running through guys. USC's defense did not want to tackle this dude, and I don't blame him because he's a freight train. Carson Steele also had a couple of nice runs as well. Going into the Big Ten next season, if Chip Kelly does remain in UCLA, this is a program that many people need to start paying more attention to. When you think of Chip Kelly's teams, you think of finesse, you think of a team that likes to win on the perimeter with speed, but that's kind of the Chip Kelly that we saw when he was coaching at Oregon. The Chip Kelly that we see now at UCLA, he's completely changed his offensive philosophy. It's not about winning with speed and winning on the perimeter anymore. It's about being physical. And one thing that UCLA's teams have been the last 3 years under Chip Kelly is really physical, really tough. And a team like USC that kind of makes their killing with having great receivers and having a lot of speed on the field and being a finesse team, this just was one of those games where styles make fights, and UCLA's style of play just wasn't suited for USC to be able to find a way to win out this game, because you got to be able to win up front. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much speed you have at receiver, how much talent you have at quarterback, if you're not able to win the line of scrimmage. And UCLA, they had all the answers for USC up front. USC defensively, yeah, they weren't bad, but it just was one of those performances that you look at Lincoln Riley, and you now got to start saying that going into 2024, he definitely is on the hot seat, without a doubt. His tenure at USC up to this point has been a major disappointment. Yeah, last season, they won double-digit games, but you lost to Tulane in the New Year's Six Bowl game. And this season, you have really high expectations. People were expecting you to be able to make it back to the national championship picture, and many people felt like you were locked to make it to the college football playoffs. But not only do you miss out on making it to the playoffs, but you also don't make it into the Pac-12 championship game, which is a major disappointment when you look at how easy it is to recruit at USC and the talent that they brought in from the transfer portal. Lincoln Riley's teams just aren't physically tough. And going into the Big Ten next season, that's going to be a huge issue for them. They're going to have to be able to change their mentality. When you got to go up against teams like Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, you got to be able to be ready to go to war. You got to be ready to be in for a dogfight. And USC isn't a team that's able to win dogfights. UCLA, on the other hand, I think they could have more success next season in the Big Ten than what people initially are thinking, if Dante Moore is able to take big steps in his development over the course of this offseason. I don't think the dude's awful. I'm not going to write him off. It's just that he probably wasn't ready to play right away in his first season as a true freshman, regardless of how highly touted he was coming out of high school. This definitely was a season where he probably could have used to redshirt like Arch Manning, learn the system, get more acclimated to the speed of the game, because going from high school football to college football in the span of the year is a really hard adjustment to make, and not just every true freshman quarterback can be Trevor Lawrence and be a phenomenally their true freshman season. Sometimes it takes guys a couple of years to make that adjustment from high school ball to collegiate ball, and I think you can probably say that to be true with Dante Moore. But UCLA has a really promising future under Chip Kelly. I get why some UCLA fans may want this dude fired, because he doesn't really have a great overall win-loss record with UCLA football. But his first 3 seasons, it took him a while to get this program off the ground. But his last 3 seasons, I mean, when you look at his record, the last 3 seasons to his first 3 years at UCLA, it's night and day. I never understood why UCLA would even entertain getting rid of Chip Kelly. His only problem has been his reluctance to get rid of the previous defensive coordinator. Now you got Anthony Lynn's sons, the Anton Lynn, who probably is going to be a hot candidate to be a defensive coordinator for a lot of other programs this offseason. I'm really interested in seeing if UCLA is going to be able to keep this guy around because he's did God's work with this defense. You know, this pass rush has been really great all season long. And USC and Lincoln Riley, you drastically need to overhaul that defense. Not just do you need to bring in a new defensive coordinator, but you probably need to bring in some more big boys up front, and you got to recruit better. And a lot of people say that the problem with USC's defense isn't just talent, but it's also an attitude problem because Lincoln Riley doesn't put a lot of emphasis on that. And the way that Lincoln Riley runs his team and operates his practices aren't really built towards physicality and preaching that style of football. You see, UCLA is one of those bully ball teams. They want to bully you up front. They want to be more physically dominant, and they want to impose their will against you. USC, they want to do all these flashy highlight reel throws and have all these highlight reel catches downfield, and they want to make a lot of things happen after the catch. But when you match them up against a physical football team like a UCLA or a Utah, they look outmatched up front. So until USC is able to get more tougher, I don't think they're going to have too much success under Lincoln Riley until they kind of have that philosophical flip. That's something that this program is missing. That's something that Lincoln Riley teams have never had. They've never been tough. They've never been physically imposing up front. Although they do have talented offensive linemen, he has had some really good offensive lines in the past, but they haven't really been offensive lines that are known to maul you to the ground like Georgia or Michigan or even Notre Dame and UCLA. So UCLA and Chip Kelly got a really big win over USC and Lincoln Riley. USC was a 6.5-point favorite coming into this game. And you would have thought that USC would have been able to win this game and force UCLA to just move on from Chip Kelly, but this win probably kept Chip Kelly around and UCLA for the time being, but I never felt like they should have thought about moving on from him anyway unless you were going to upgrade and bring in Jimbo Fisher, and I don't even know if Jimbo Fisher is that big of an upgrade when you think about how much of a disappointment his tenure at Texas A&M was. He pretty much fell on his face at A&M in College Station. So I don't really think that Jimbo Fisher would have been that big of an upgrade over Chip Kelly. And I think that Chip Kelly is a really good coach. He's on pace to have another 8-win season. The last 3 years, he's won 8 games or more. UCLA definitely is a program that's starting to trend upwards, and they don't really have all the resources that USC has. You see, Chip Kelly, what a lot of people don't really talk about is how he kind of has overachieved at UCLA. They don't have top-notch facilities. This program doesn't put a lot of money into the football program, at least enough money need be to be able to compete with some of the top programs in the nation. That's why the recruiting kind of isn't able to be better, and that's why they got to utilize the transfer portal so much. If USC was just as invested into the football program as a school like Ohio State and Michigan, okay, then you probably would expect for Lincoln Riley, his job to definitely be on the hot seat. But this is a program that has been down for the last couple of years, and outside of last season, there hasn't really been too many other great seasons that USC has had in the past. So Lincoln Riley, I just think based on his first season alone, that's going to be enough to keep him around and buy him at least 2 more years, even if next season is another disappointment. But I doubt that Lincoln Riley's going to be fired if USC disappoints again in 2024. I think he at least has 2 more years to prove himself and turn things around and get the Trojans into national championship contention. Meanwhile, for UCLA, Chip Kelly, as I mentioned earlier, this is a program that isn't really all dialed in on football. They put a lot of money into the basketball program, but the football program doesn't really get that same treatment. So I think that Chip Kelly has overachieved at UCLA in a sense. And now with this program starting to put a little bit more emphasis and a little bit more attention towards the football program, they could be trending upwards. And I like this program's trajectory heading into the Big Ten. UCLA beats USC 38-20. final game of the season. Michigan survived Maryland. You know, they got out to a 23-7 lead midway through the second quarter. And then after that, Maryland's offense started to hum. Taulia Tagovailoa, he made some really big throws downfield. These receivers were having their way with Michigan's secondary. From midway second quarter until about early fourth quarter, Maryland's offense was having a lot of success against a really good Michigan defense. Michigan's defensive line, though, they came through in the biggest moments late in this game. They also were causing havoc early in this game. You had the Taulia strip sack fumble that resulted in a touchdown. Then right after that, you have the special teams mishap by Maryland, which they were really fortunate that Michigan didn't fall on that thing and it resulted in a safety instead of a touchdown. This game looked like it was just going to be a beatdown the way that it started out for Michigan. But the fact that Maryland was able to lock in and get composed and settled in, they scored 3 quarterback sneaks. This was a really good game and a really hard-fought effort by Mike Locksley and company. But the same reason why Maryland lost this game is the same reason why Maryland kind of is stuck in the middle of the pack of the Big Ten, because they can't find ways to seek out close wins against great teams. You know, Maryland, in the fourth quarter of big games, anytime they have a little bit of momentum, they always find a way to fold. And they folded in this game. The offensive line completely fell apart all throughout the fourth quarter. They got into third and long situations. Taulia was making bad decisions. Mike Sanders still had, 2 interceptions alone in this game by himself because of bad decisions by Taulia Tagovailoa. Now, the third down interception that he threw on third and long, backed up in their own end zone, it's like, you kind of have no choice but to throw that pass because you just got to try to make something happen. But Taulia just isn't a great quarterback. He's not a bad quarterback, but he's not good enough to turn this Maryland program around. And their defense played a really good game for the most part. It's like you would have thought that Michigan just would have ran for 250 plus on this Maryland defense. And although they did outgain Maryland by a handful, Maryland only had 15 rushing yards in this game. All Maryland could do was throw the football. Michigan's offense did not look that great in this game. And if it wasn't for the defense getting that scoop and score, strip sack, fumble, touchdown, and, getting that block punt that resulted in a safety, this game probably could have looked entirely differently. Now, of course, they had success running the football, but the passing game didn't look that great. And I keep telling people that J.J. McCarthy is the most overrated quarterback in college football, and we saw that in this game. This dude threw a bad interception in the red zone where he stared down his wide receiver, threw it right to the Maryland defensive back that was there right before halftime. If Michigan comes away with points there, and that's a touchdown, that probably puts this game on ice. And after that play, Maryland, the momentum started to tilt in their favor. You have receivers that were making big catches all over this Michigan secondary. One thing about Maryland is that this offense at times, when they're humming and they're in rhythm and they're hop, they're really hard to stop. But the fact that they just didn't have enough horses up front, and Mike Locksley and company are known for kind of folding and finding ways to win big games when it looks like they got a chance to pull off the upset. That's a large reason why Michigan lost this game. If they were going up against a better coach team, I think that they probably lose this matchup. Now, they're going up against Ohio State next week. And if Ohio State can stop the run, I'm really concerned about Michigan's ability to have efficiency offensively. J.J. McCarthy is not that good. He's not bad, but he's not this great QB a lot of people are projecting him to be. I don't think he's a first-round quarterback right now. He still doesn't do a really good job at looking off defenders with his eyes. He stares down receivers too often. Yes, he got a really nice arm, and he's a really good athlete, especially when it comes to extending plays and buying time for guys to get open. But he still has a lot of room to go until I can look at him and say, oh, yeah, like J.J. McCarthy is a great quarterback. I think that he's massively overrated, and we saw that displayed in this game. And if he doesn't play better football against Ohio State, they could lose that game in really embarrassing fashion. At least with Kyle McCord at quarterback, he's not good neither, but he has Marvin Harrison Jr. to throw the football to. Michigan has Roman Wilson, but Roman Wilson ain't no Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison literally has carried Ohio State's offense in a handful of games, including that win over Penn State. When you got a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka and all the talent that they have at the wide receiver position, it's kind of hard for a guy like Kyle McCord just to completely stink it up. Michigan isn't that talented at wide receiver. They're also not that deep in. That's not what they do best. I don't think they're a team that is going to be able to win games just relying on J.J. McCarthy to air it out all game long. They got to be balanced. They got to be able to play complementary football, and they're still a run-first team at the end of the day. Maryland at times in the second half was able to get Michigan's offense off the field, and they were able to stop the run. And if Ohio State can take away that run game and this becomes a one-dimensional Michigan offense like we saw last year in their semifinal loss to TCU, they're going to be in trouble. Maryland showed a lot of big weaknesses with Michigan's game. You know, yeah, they are the most physical team in college football. They got a great offensive line. They got great running backs. But J.J. McCarthy is really inconsistent as a passer. And I don't know if he's going to be good enough to get them to win over Ohio State. I'm still giving them a shot because Kyle McCord isn't that great neither. And if they can find a way to take away Marvin Harrison Jr., it's a game. But if Marvin Harrison Jr. gets going and they don't have any way to slow him down, and plus their run game gets slowed down, Ohio State wins that game, and it probably could be by multiple possessions. So Michigan needs better play out of J.J. McCarthy next week going into the game. For Maryland, this is a really disappointing loss. You probably weren't expecting to win this game. Hell, Maryland fans were probably crossing their fingers that this would at least be a competitive game. And at one point it was. You would have thought that Maryland was going to get blown out once they went down 23-7. But the fact that they fought back into this game and they had a shot to win it all the way until the fourth quarter and they just fell apart due to self-inflicted wounds and errors and just not playing their best football, it's a big reason why Maryland kind of stuck in the middle of the Big Ten picture. When you think of the three best teams in the Big Ten, you think Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. In any order, Michigan is number one, Ohio State's number two, and then you got Penn State number three for guys who want to be technical about the hierarchy in the Big Ten. And then after that, you probably have what? Iowa, Minnesota. Who else? Maryland is in that conversation. When Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA come into town, Maryland pretty much could become irrelevant in the Big Ten. They could become a bottom feeder in the Big Ten because they're not really recruiting all that well. Mike Locksley isn't doing a good job at recruiting that area. Like Maryland is a job where you could be able to pull off some big time upsets at if you have the right head coach who can recruit the area well, and Mike Locksley isn't doing a good job of that, and Taulia isn't that great of a quarterback to get Maryland over the hump that they're in right now in terms of breaking through and being able to actually be a legitimate threat in the Big Ten to the big boys of this conference. Maryland just isn't one of those teams that knows how to play a full game for 4 quarters. They'll play a good game for the first 3 against you, and then in the fourth quarter, they just go ahead and they gift you the win. That's something that I've seen continuously throughout Mike Locksley's tenure as the head coach of the Terps, man. Like, they'll get into these close games against Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, and then in the fourth quarter, they just find ways to fall flat on their face. Michigan got a really tough win against Maryland. They struggled in this game. Once they got that 23-7 lead, Maryland was able to hang around, and they were able to give them a little bit of a scare, but Michigan's defense was a really big difference maker in the Wolverines being able to remain undefeated. And now we get the game, them against Ohio State. I don't know who's going to win that thing right now, but we are going to be talking about that matchup a lot this week in depth on the podcast. So make sure that you guys subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we upload content. because we're going to be pumping out a lot of Michigan and Ohio State content over the next couple of days. The Wolverines get the win over the Terps, 31-24. They remain unbeaten on the season. Georgia went to Rocky Top and they embarrassed the Tennessee Volunteers. After Tennessee scored that running touchdown, their first offensive possession of this game, Georgia didn't allow these boys to have too much success offensively after. And I don't know what it is about Georgia's defense and allowing teams to score points on their opening possessions on offense. We saw the same thing happen against Florida. For some reason, Georgia's defense, they just say, F it. We're just going to allow teams to have a little bit of success their first possession, and then after that, we're just going to body bag you, because this was a body bag special, people. And you would have thought that Tennessee would have been able to keep this game much closer than what it was with them playing at home. You know, all this week I heard Tennessee fans screaming at me, man, Carson Beck could struggle in this game. This is his first game against a truly hostile environment on the road. Well, you know what Carson Beck did in his first true test in a hostile environment? Well, he went 24-30, 298 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and he had no interceptions. You know, Georgia, this year's team isn't as good as their previous championship teams, but they're still really good. And not every single team is the same team that they were the previous year. Every single season, you get a new team. This Georgia team offensively is the deepest and the most talented that it's been at skill position ever under Kirby Smart. I can't recall ever seeing Kirby Smart's offenses being this deep and stacked at wide receiver. I mean, you have Drake Maye, Jack Saint, who had 7 receptions for 91 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Dylan Bell was going on. Didn't really hear this guy's name for a majority of this season until this game. Then you got Brock Bowers, who we already know about. He's one of the best players in all of college football. He was going off. But Carson Beck put together a masterful performance against a really good Tennessee defense. And Tennessee, they just got dominated on all phases of the game. Special teams, offense, defense. Joe Milton, he had a really disappointing performance in this game. If Tennessee was going to have a shot at pulling off this upset, they needed Joe Milton to come out and have a Heisman-worthy performance. When you look at Joe Milton from a talent standpoint, he has all the physical tools and attributes to be a really great quarterback, especially in the NFL. But in this game, he wasn't able to make enough big-time throws downfield. These receivers weren't able to challenge this Georgia secondary, which kind of surprised me. I thought that these receivers would have had a lot more success than what they did in this game against this Georgia secondary, because these receivers are really good and they're really talented. But the fact that Joe Milton wasn't able to have too much time to throw the football, the fact that this Georgia pass rush actually showed up to play in this game, and outside of that big run, Tennessee's rushing attack got pretty much shut down for all of this game right after that opening touchdown run that they had to start this game. That was it. And then they got a field goal right before halftime, and that's all the offense they could muster. You know, this game has been pretty much a clear indicator of how this season has went for Tennessee offensively anytime they've went against a competent defense. Against Alabama, in the first half of that game, they scored 20 points going into halftime, and then Alabama's defense completely shuts them down. And you can say the same thing for the way that this game went for them offensively, although they didn't score 20 in the first half. They only scored 10, and they didn't score anything in the second half. They lack explosiveness in the passing game when it comes to being able to push the football downfield vertically. And it's not because Joe Milton doesn't have the talent to do that. We know this dude has probably the strongest arm in the history of football, but it's the fact that he doesn't have the accuracy, he doesn't have the touch needed, and the offensive line and pass protection this year has been nowhere good as what it was last season with Hendon Hooker. And Tennessee's defense, although they have been great against an offense like Georgia, they were just outmatched. There was just no way Tennessee was going to be able to stay around in this game without having great quarterback play. To beat Alabama or to beat Georgia, you need 2 things. You need good quarterback play, and you need receivers that are good enough to challenge their secondaries. Tennessee had only one of those things. I still believe their receivers were good enough. It's just that Joe Milton just didn't show up in this game, and you need more out of a guy like Joe Milton. And now he's pretty much done with his collegiate career. I'm eager to see where he lands in the NFL draft because he's a pretty interesting prospect. He does have a lot of upside and a lot of potential, and he hasn't been bad this season. He has been pretty good, but, you know, the difference between him and Hendon Hooker is night and day. Hendon Hooker gave you Heisman caliber play. Joe Milton just gave you good, serviceable quarterback play for this season. And that's why Tennessee's offense kind of had to change their philosophy. This was a team that was known for throwing the football all over the field against you. And now this season, they transformed into a physical run-first team. And when the run game isn't going for Tennessee, they have no success because of their inability to do what they were able to do best in 2022, generating those big plays downfield. And Georgia is going up against Georgia Tech next week, which they probably should manhandle. And then we pretty much get what I believe is the national championship and the SEC championship game. The Bulldogs against the Crimson Tide. I'm really excited for that game. Georgia, as I mentioned earlier, it's funny because although they're not as good as what they have been when they've won back-to-back national championships, they still are arguably the best team in college football. This team is just so deep offensively. The quarterback play has been so good this year, and they're also able to run the football as well. Their defense, you know, at times their defense doesn't play as good as what they have been in the past, but their secondary still is pretty good, although they did give up a couple of big plays against Vanderbilt. For the most part, this still is one of the best teams in college football, and you don't think about Georgia in that way because the level of expectations that you have for this team, performance-wise, is always so high that it's kind of hard for them to top that. And it's kind of easy to overlook just how truly dominant this team has been this season when you look at how talented they were on defense the previous 2 years. And that's why I was telling a friend of mine a couple of days ago. I was like, even though Georgia isn't the dominant team that we've seen in 2021 and 2022, they're still running through the competition. And it's weird because Georgia, they have a tendency to play down the competition. I remember when they almost lost to Auburn. They gave up 200 yards on the ground. They played down to teams that they should blow out, but then they blow out the teams that are amongst the best in the conference. You beat Missouri pretty handily, even though that game was a lot closer than how the game against Ole Miss and Tennessee were. You blew out Florida. In big games, Georgia plays their best football. And games against teams that they're expected to blow out, they tend to underperform sometimes. But this is still one of the most complete teams in all of college football. They don't really have too many significant flaws other than their secondary being a little bit inconsistent at times, similar to the same issue that Alabama's defense has. Their defense is really good, but their secondary can give up a good amount of big plays over the top. And I think the same thing can kind of be said about Georgia in a sense, although not to the degree as Alabama. But Georgia remains undefeated on the season. You might have thought this was a trap game, but all it was some more dog food that the SEC was feeding to Georgia to continue to boost up their resume and their schedule. Even if Georgia loses in the SEC championship game, there still is an argument for them to get into the college football playoffs. I believe that with how tough their November stretch has been, beating Tennessee on the road, being able to beat Missouri and Ole Miss, two teams that were ranked inside the top 5, top 10, those are 3 really quality wins that if Georgia loses the SEC championship game, even with one loss, I still think they got a significant argument for being included in this year's college football playoffs. Colorado got absolutely embarrassed by Washington State on Friday night. And we've made the joke all season long about how this offensive line was going to get Shedeur Sanders injured. Well, it no longer is a joke anymore, people, because it actually happened. Shedeur Sanders, in the first quarter alone, was sacked 4 or 5 times in this game, and it didn't take him long for him to get injured. He ended up getting hit on a big play, which resulted in a strip sack that resulted in a touchdown. And this same dude, number 80 for Washington State, also ran back another play that happened in similar fashion later on in this game. And once Shedeur Sanders went down, you knew this game was over. Okay? And without Shedeur Sanders, Colorado probably will only have one win at best this season. You know, he's been the heart and soul of this team. He's been the glue that has kept this team from being worse than what it has been since they started out 3-0. And you would have expected for Colorado to have a much more competitive game against a Washington State team that, just like you, started out really hot. They were unbeaten at one point, and then they completely fell off the cliff. Washington State just looked like a superiorly more talented team than Colorado, even though they weren't, and they just looked better coached. Kermani McClain, he was getting cooked out there. Travis Hunter, he had a little bit of a shaky performance as well. This just was a terrible performance by Colorado. All right, this offensive line got Shedeur Sanders injured, and it no longer is a running joke anymore. It actually happened. This season, for me, has kind of been a little bit disappointing. Although Deion Sanders has exceeded expectations, he won 4 games as opposed to them only winning 1 game last year. But it just could have been more, if you get my drift. They started out with so much hype once they started out 3-0 because they overexceeded expectations. And then people recalibrated their expectations. Then they played Oregon. And when Dan Lanning said that the Cinderella story is over, he meant that shit. Because when Oregon annihilated and clobbered Colorado, they only won 1 game since that loss. Like, the Cinderella story was truly over. Dan Lanning and the Ducks truly ended the Cinderella run that Colorado was on. And I asked you guys the other day to grade Deion Sanders for a season at Colorado, and the majority of you guys are giving him a C. Which I probably will give him a C also, because I wanted to give him a B or a B+, because they did start it out 3-0. They got a big win on the road against TCU. I don't care how bad TCU is. They get a big-time win on the road in week 1 in that kind of environment when you were a 3-point touchdown underdog is huge. The fact that you started out 3-0, you pretty much already tripled your win total in your first 3 games was huge, and you exceeded expectations. And at that time, Deion Sanders looked like he could do no wrong. But then after that, and the more you watch Colorado, and I've watched pretty much every single Colorado game this year, you start to realize Deion's flaws. And you see, coming in to this season, I thought that Colorado would at least be a 6-win team. I understood that the realistic expectations were 3 to 4 wins, which I was understanding of. But I thought that Deion Sanders was a better coach than what he actually has proven to be this season. He's not a bad coach. He's not a garbage coach, but he definitely has a lot of learning to do and a lot of growth that he has to make as a head coach himself. I feel like he did a bad job of being able to manage this team when a lot of people were saying nothing but good things about them and their performance and the fact that they're 3-0. And it's a difference between coaching a team that doesn't have a lot of expectations and that's playing games to prove people wrong versus coaching a team that has all this praise from the media and now people are expecting things out of you. He did a bad job of being able to handle the hype that Colorado got after their 3-0 start. Because once people started to recalibrate those expectations, this team wasn't able to handle it. And I also feel like this team, to a degree, they didn't really have a great job of being humble. You know, before they played Oregon, they were dancing and stomping and disrespecting Oregon in the middle of the field pre-game before that game kicked off. And that really set off Oregon. And when Dan Lanning said that we're going to talk with our pads, you know, that pretty much was a clear indicator of how Colorado at times, they're not focused. They weren't locked in. And that's my biggest, you know, that's my biggest criticism of Deion Sanders and how he's handled this team his first season. All right, you can say they won 4 games. It's a huge accomplishment. It's a success. Yes, it is. But let's not also deny the fact that more could have been done. They should have beaten Stanford. You didn't have to get embarrassed by Oregon in that way if your players were a little bit more ready to play. The fact that you're stomping on Oregon's logo and dancing on it, that's disrespectful. That shows that you weren't completely focused on that game. I do feel like the media attention and the publicity started to get to some of these players' heads. They kind of started to get a little bit egotistical, and same thing with Deion Sanders. The fact that he didn't make the necessary personnel changes until late into the season, I think that's ego. Kamani McLean, we would have loved to see him out there a little bit earlier. Deion was right about that. But not playing that true freshman wide receiver, I think his name is Omarion Miller or Mitchell. Don't quote me on that. Number 14. He only played in that USC game in the second half, and he was going off. And after that, we've rarely seen him play. That's ego. You should be having him on the field a lot more. The fact that they refused to run the football more than 10 times in the first half, that's ego. The fact that he went from Sean Lewis to Pat Shurmur, that's kind of ego, because I never felt like Sean Lewis was the problem. The problem is that you're asking this guy to run an offense that's tailored around Shedeur Sanders throwing the football when you don't have the kind of team to sustain that style of offense. When you're going air raid and you're throwing the football 40, 30, 60 times a game, that's not playing complimentary football, because you got to be able to be balanced. You at least have to be able to make the defense at least think about you running the ball potentially. But Colorado, the fact that they were one-dimensional on offense and this defense didn't really play that great for the majority of this year, there's a lot of things that Deion Sanders has to work on. His clock management is awful. There hasn't really been too many bust games I've watched this year when Colorado has had all 3 of their timeouts in the full quarter, because most of the times they're using them on situations that don't even involve them needing a timeout. Having too many men on the field on certain occasions, having too many self-inflicted penalties on themselves. This team wasn't greatly coached. And Deion Sanders isn't a bad coach. He's an okay coach, but he's a coach right now that's still learning. He was a big fish in a small pond when he was coaching at Jackson State. And even when he was in the SWAC, he was dominating the SWAC just because he had a more talented team than the majority of teams that he was going up against. But even then, they lost in the Celebration Bowl. His last game at Jackson State, they got embarrassed in the Celebration Bowl. And a large reason for that was due to coaching. So Deion Sanders, if he's going to be able to sustain that Colorado, he needs to improve as a coach overall, and he kind of needs to look in the mirror and kind of change some things about himself personally. Because you can't coach at Colorado and Power 5 the same way that you were coaching at Jackson State. You were a big fish in a small pond at Jackson State. Now, you're a big fish in a really big pond in NCAA Division I FBS college football. And if you go into the Big 12, you potentially could become a small fish in a big pond if your coaching doesn't step up. Now, I still believe in Deion Sanders, but this loss showed us that the main reason why this team was able to have the amount of success that they did was due to Shedeur Sanders. And Shedeur Sanders, if you didn't view him as one of the best quarterbacks in the game prior to this game, him getting injured and not being on the field should show you just how much he meant to this team and how much he was carrying this team on his back. When he's not in there, this team is arguably the worst team in all of college football. He was the only thing that made this team as good as what they were when they were 4-0, minus Travis Hunter and a couple of other performances from Jimmy Horn Jr. and Xavier Weaver. For the most part, this just was a team that had some really good wide receivers and a really great quarterback, and that was about it. The defense hasn't been there. The offensive line hasn't been good enough to be able to sustain success at this level. You refuse to run the football, and you got really good running backs. Your running backs don't suck. Like, All McCaskill had 16 touchdowns. He was averaging 5 yards per carry his freshman season at Houston. His true freshman season, by the way, and we have rarely seen him this season. There's been a lot of talent this season that has been underutilized by Colorado. And the fact that the in-game adjustments haven't been that great neither. Deion Sanders has a lot to work on as a coach, and Washington State, they laid it on these boys. Cameron Ward, this dude is a really great quarterback, and I'm really surprised that Washington State has had the kind of season that they've had. You would have thought that they would have at least been a little bit better than what they've been up to this point. But Colorado, man, it's like, yeah, you can clap your hands, and we're going to celebrate Deion Sanders winning 4 games, and this does kind of look like a successful season, but it just feels as if Coach Prime and the Buffs left a little bit more on the table. They left a couple of plates that they could have ate or they could have gave away. That Stanford game, you never should have lost that game. That should have been a win, okay? And even that game against USC, you probably could have had a chance at winning that game if you had better clock management. But Deion Sanders, he's not the perfect coach that me and a lot of people thought that he was when he was coming into this thing. We thought that the only thing keeping Colorado back from success was going to be the fact that he didn't have all the dogs that he needed to compete at this level and to be able to be a championship team, but to even be a bowl eligible team. It wasn't just all about talent. A lot of these games that Colorado has lost down the stretch has mainly been due in part to poor coaching. And the coaching needs to step it up, and the recruiting even needs to step it up. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on this week. But Washington State, they embarrassed Colorado 56-14. Shedeur Sanders got injured. This team, we saw in this blowout loss how much Shedeur meant to this Buffs team this season and how big of a factor he had in their wins, because when he's not on the field, they're one of the worst teams in the nation. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. Every episode of the podcast is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. We didn't go live last week because I had a lot of final assignments that I was trying to get done before the Thanksgiving break. We pretty much have finished those assignments, so we're going to be back live streaming. We probably will go live tonight, Sunday, after Sunday night football, depending on when you guys see this. And if we don't go live Sunday night, you definitely can count on us going live for the remainder of this week, Monday, Tuesday, even Wednesday and Thursday night after the Thanksgiving games. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.